And I've noticed gratitude, like you're very good. And I don't know if you've consciously cultivated gratitude, but I've realized as someone who's like, you know, your failure message is so front and center, yet underneath it, I've really noticed that gratitude, like you're very good at, you know, saying things and consistently reinforcing gratitude. Is that something you've consciously had to lean into, or what are your thoughts on gratitude?
What a beautiful first question. And I've never been asked that before. I haven't consciously lent into it. I am genuinely so grateful. And I think it's one of those things of knowing, I know in my bones how life could have turned out. And the genesis of How to Fail was because my life wasn't going according to the plan that I thought I had set myself, which is being happily married, having kids, having a very conventional, boring, heteronormative life in many ways. But in my mid 30s, that totally imploded. And I'd married the wrong person. I got divorced and I tried and failed to have the babies that I'd yearned for. And I went through unsuccessful fertility treatment. And then another relationship ended. And I kind of kidded myself that I'd made the right decisions and made different decisions with the new relationship. But I hadn't really, because I wasn't being honest about myself. And I wasn't being honest about the things that I had got wrong and the things that I wish were different. And so I'm very grateful because it could so easily have gone the other way. And I think the fact that I've had, ironically, the success that I've had with How to Fail, I am aware of that irony that a podcast about failure has become one of the most successful things I've ever done. But I'm very aware that it could have gone another way entirely. And I had had a whole other career, as well as a personal life that had been slightly derailed. I'd also had a whole other career in that time as well, in that I'd been a print journalist and I'd always wanted to write novels and I'd written the first couple of novels. But I felt kind of trapped by that. And I didn't feel completely fulfilled by my career as a print journalist. And I didn't feel that it was my purpose. And so I suppose I'd had the experience of putting things out there that not that many people had engaged with. So, I'm very proud of my books, but not that many people read my first couple of novels. And I know that because when the podcast became a success, people were like, "Oh, you're a writer." I was like, "Yeah, been doing that for years." And so I know what it's like to have no one for it to feel like no one cares about what you're putting out there. And I remember book events that I used to do, and 4 people would turn up, and there would be 4 people on the panel. So we were almost outnumbering with the chairperson, the audience. And I think that's where a lot of my gratitude comes from, is that I know how hard it is, and I'm so grateful that now there's this community who allow me to show up as myself, because that's really at the root of my journey, is that part of my feelings of failure came from placing unrealistic expectations on who I thought I should be, rather than being able to embrace the flaws and the imperfections of who I really am. So to have this community who enable me to do that, I'm perpetually grateful. So I think it's all of those things wrapped up. But I am aware that it's a healthy attribute at the same time. I would hate anyone ever to feel that I take any of it for granted, because I've experienced that feeling on a personal level of someone not seeing you and someone taking you for granted. And I never want to make anyone feel like that. I want people to feel seen and that they're a really big part of what we're building together.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
get it. Totally get it. There generally isn't a day that goes by that I don't use an instant appliance, whether it's my instant vortex air fryer or whether it's an Instant Pot itself. I use them every day because they save me time and they're quick and easy and efficient. So much so that we've partnered with them now, and they're offering you 20% off their full price items until the end of February. Simply use the code Happy Pair. They also have a number of other products on special when you check out their website. They really are amazing. Great time saving kitchen appliance as well, worth checking out. Like one thing that, like, my wife's a psychologist, and she'll often say when a child is born, it has many needs, but 2 primarily needs. One is the need to belong, and 2 is to be themselves. And often many people will not be themselves with the desire to belong, and then that
Yes.
carries through their life. And it sounds like the first chapter of, before you started this, how, your failure, I shouldn't call it your failure, your journey with how to fail or how not to fail. Your journey with that, it sounds like you wanted to belong more so than be yourself. Would you see that as accurate?
100% accurate. I love that you're married to a psychologist. My best friend is a therapist, and it's
Oh
just
yeah,
one of
yeah.
the key relationships in my life. Um, uh, totally. I cannot tell you how much I identify with that. And it's partly because I grew up in the north of Ireland. We moved out to Derry when I was 4. My dad, he's retired now, but he was a surgeon, and he got a job there. And we had a slight family connection with Belfast. And he got a job there, and we spent the next sort of 20 odd years there. And as you can hear, I speak with a very English accent, and I never picked up an Irish accent. I had a slight lilt. I don't know what that was about. Your wife would probably have an interesting theory about what that was about, but I never fitted in, even though that small village outside Derry was my home. We would be stopped constantly at military checkpoints, and the soldier would say, "Oh, are you on holiday?" And we'd have to be like, "No, we live here." And then they'd be sort of slightly suspicious of us because we weren't military, and it's such a traumatic time for that part of the world. The 70s, 80s, 90s, bombs were still going off at weekends in shopping centres that I would go to. I mean, I got very used to that. And I think therefore, not only did I not fit in, but I felt scared not fitting in because I felt that speaking with an English accent marked me out, not only as an outsider, but in some territories, like the enemy. And it didn't feel safe to speak as myself. And I think I internalized that very, very deeply. And my primary school was lovely in Derry. I went to Foyle Prep, shout out to Foyle Prep. And then I went to secondary school in Belfast, which was less of a healthy experience. And I didn't have a particularly good time because I was making the mistake of trying so hard to fit in, but also not understanding who I was and not understanding what I was doing wrong. And I never did fit in there. And then when I went to a new school, so I got a scholarship to a boarding school in England. Went to boarding school in England. I hadn't grown up there, but immediately I was accepted because I spoke with the right voice.
Wow.
And I think it took me a really long time to disentangle the difference between true belonging, where you are accepted as you really are, and fitting in where you change yourself because you think that you'll be accepted. And that lasted into my 20s and 30s, and it really polluted a lot of my relationships. But now in my 40s, I totally understand the difference. And you're right that now I feel like I have a space where I belong.
Yeah, yeah, it really is that conflict for us all.
Yeah,
And it's
I
something
think
that we all battle with in every moment. There are moments when it's like, no, I want to be nice and I want the person to like me, but I gotta say this hard thing that's going to upset them. You know, that way I see it as a
yes.
constant. It's not like I've arrived. I think it's a journey in it.
Totally. And then it's like, well, you're thinking about what the other person might want. But I took that to such an extreme in my 20s and early 30s that I wouldn't even ask the other person what they wanted. I would project what I thought they wanted from my own position of limited knowledge.
The total pleaser. You were the total pleaser on steroids.
Exactly. And then I would seek to meet that projected desire, and I would contort myself and completely forget what I wanted. There were points in my life I honestly just didn't know what I would want. Right down to like a partner asked me, I remember this so vividly. An ex-boyfriend was like, "Should we go for lunch?" I was like, "I don't know. Do you want to?" It's like, "Yeah, where do you want to go?" I was like, "I don't mind. Like, where do you want to eat?" And it was just constant. And
Oh,
really, that's a betrayal of yourself. And
totally.
not only is it a betrayal of yourself, but you're not showing up as yourself to your loved ones. So it's kind of a betrayal of them too, even though you think you're
There's
being so
kind of an
selfless.
emptiness there. There's kind of a vacuousness where it's kind of like, come on, where are you? Let's.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry. And what were the major like? Because what were the major events? Like, was it the depths of your failures and reaching where you were forced into the darker places of your soul? Like, what were the events that catalyzed this blooming and blossoming into this incredibly confident, self? The woman which you are today,
Mhm.
which is a really glorious expression of you.
Oh, thank you for saying that. Confidence is such an interesting one because I have historically had a real problem with low self esteem. But the older I get, the more I realize that practice and flexing that internal muscle of pretending that you're confident has an amazingly positive effect because because if you don't feel it but you're sort of pretending it, your body gets used to what that must feel like. And then you gradually become more confident and more resilient. And I think also the amount of hours I've done what I've done. So I've done, it's that Malcolm Gladwell thing of like 10,000 hours makes you an expert. That's the great privilege of age, is that I feel like I've done enough writing now and I've done enough podcasting that I can trust myself that I know what I'm doing. So that feeds into the confidence too. And then I think the key moments, I definitely feel my childhood in Ireland was a key moment that I only really understood the importance of it relatively recently. And it was partly because Jamie Dornan came on How to Fail, and he had been to the same school in Belfast. He's a bit younger than I am, but his sister was in my year, and he had had such a similar experience. And we were able to talk about the weirdness of growing up in the north of Ireland at that specific time. And it made me feel so much less weird in myself. And so that was huge for me, understanding the impact that that childhood had. And then I think the other two major catalysts, one was heartbreak. So I don't know how many times you two have been through heartbreak, but I think I've had 6 major heartbreaks in my life,
Wow.
and they are, I know I'm a right old slut. Is that
Well,
what
you might. No, no. I mean,
No, you
where,
describe
I
yourself
mean,
as a
I mean,
serial.
where that you put your heart out to that degree, and that you've
Yes.
had that many. That's more what I'm saying.
Yeah, and that is true. I do have a very open heart, and that's a great thing, and I never want it to change, but it does mean that I make myself vulnerable sometimes and that I'm willing to think the best of people. But heartbreak is such a difficult thing to go through because I do think it's akin to a form of grief. But the person and the relationship that you're mourning is still present in the same world as you are. And so there's a sort of torment to it as well. And one of the biggest examples I had of heartbreak was going through a divorce when I was 35. And that was a real wake up call for me because I felt so shocked that something I had really believed in was ending in this way. And I felt a great deal of shame attached to it and a great deal of failure attached to it. And surviving that and getting through it and understanding that my loved ones understood me better than I did myself and didn't consider it failure or shame and were there to support me through it was a revelation. And then the third aspect, I would say, that has really fed into my growth and the person I am is my failure to have my own child. And I self-diagnose that as a failure. I understand that it's not necessarily my failure, it's a failure of biology and conditioning and all of that. But I've had a 12-year fertility journey, which has incorporated many rounds of unsuccessful fertility treatment and many sort of surgical procedures and 3 miscarriages. And it felt like a big old battle. And I never realized that I would feel the peace I now feel on the other side of that. So last year I made the decision that it was enough and it was enough and that maybe my purpose wasn't to be a mother in the biological sense. Maybe actually my purpose was to not be a mother and to speak for those women and men who had tried and not got there, like to speak to that community and also to show up in other ways, to parent in other ways. And that's been a really revolutionary thing for me because it's made me realize something huge about failure. There are 2 different kinds of failure, I think. There's the common or garden failure where you fail your driving test or that exam that you failed haunts you still. And they're more easy to get over. I mean, it's not always easy, but generally you can, and generally you can learn something from it. And then there's the cataclysmic failure, which is something like a global pandemic or chronic illness or homelessness. And into that category, I would put infertility for me. And it taught me that although I will be sad about that forever, like there will be moments in my life where I will feel sadness or grief or loss that can coexist with living alongside it. I can also be at peace with it. I can be sad and at peace. Those 2 things can be true. And I think that learning has been one of the biggest eye openers of my life.
That it's almost like you can feel 2 or 3 things at the same time. Like I feel tired and hungry. You know, it's like, and obviously
Yeah.
they're a lot
Extraordinarily different.
extraordinarily more common than feeling grief and
Wow, what a, like
peace.
thanks for sharing that. That's really very moving. Really, really is.
Thank you.
The thing which came to me there is kind of going like, you know, people think that it's our successes which define us. You know, like it's in our common culture of where everyone's, you know, glamorizing themselves with I own this or I did that or look at me, I'm here, there, and the other. But in my experience, it's the tough. Like I too went through a divorce at 34, so I know that was
Similar.
Yeah, so similar. So, and I remember it was an extremely difficult situation. Like it's really difficult because you've got this external expectation. We live in a small town. You know, we grew up in a small town, so you feel other people's, whether it's right or not. I certainly felt the kind of expectation and judgments from others, and that sense of shame. And that kind of very challenging journey, I think, definitely has made me a much better person, much more. I'm much happier in my own skin as a result of that journey. So I can imagine you having gone through the depths, like some of the most challenging situations. Like I have so much. I feel very moved with what you just said, and I can only imagine that that can really bring you to your core you.
Thank you. I'm really sorry for what you went through. Can I ask if you have kids?
I have 3 kids. I've another.
From that
I have
marriage?
2 from my first marriage, and then I've recently had another one.
He's got a
my
little
second
4-month-old
marriage. I've got
little
a
fella.
5-month-old.
5-month.
Yeah, nearly 5. Yeah.
Oh,
Big little button.
congratulations. And look at you. You're dressed and your eyes are open. Well done.
I love that. Look at your dress.
I am wearing 2 jackets.
You are. Oh, congratulations. That's amazing. You know, I think you're completely right. We wouldn't have chosen it for ourselves, but it really did strip back all of my previously held certainties about who I was and what life I was going to live. And actually, and at points that felt really panicking. I was really panicked about what I would do next, what would happen. Was I doing the right thing? And I learned to sort of allow that panic to come and go a bit like a wave. There was always an ebb and flow to it. And on the other side of that panic, there was also this wide open space. That's what I've been fearful of, was the wide open space that I hadn't planned.
Were you someone
what
that
I
was
was gonna do
constantly in
next.
relationships? Someone that went from one relationship to the next relationship to the next relationship? Yes.
How-
Serial
yes,
relationship.
How do you know?
I
From
don't
the
know,
age
just
of
guessing.
19 to 36, I was in like a series of
Wow.
back-to-back monogamous relationships.
Wow.
But it really taught me, going through a divorce, I was like, no, I haven't been doing this right. And it really taught me so many things about myself that have enabled me to show up as myself now in my current relationship. I have remarried, and I'm so grateful that I have the marriage that I have with Justin. It's a second marriage for both of us. And it feeds into our talking about gratitude. We're so grateful that we've got this. It's like amazing to get a second chance. And we don't take each other for granted because we understand how easily a relationship can sort of derail itself. And I don't think that I would have understood that had I not gone through what I'd gone through.
Yeah, it's almost like if you taste a sweet that you don't like and then you taste one you like, you go, oh, this is so good.
Yeah.
Like that type of thing. Okay, I got a good question. I think opposition. Okay, in modern day society, we celebrate the good things, and it's, you know, social media really highlights that and kind of extrapolates and expands and amplifies it. And if you look at kind of the Stoic philosophy, opposition is an intrinsic part of life, as is, you know, the light and the dark. And typically, it's the opposition that forges a much better sense of self. At least myself, when I'm, you know, going through a tough time, you feel crap and it's difficult, but at the other end of it, you feel like, yeah, now I know. Now I feel more gritty, and I know that there's more resilience. Failure is often seen as a destination. Like, where do you see the spectrum of opposition, of kind of the importance of adversity versus this tagline of failure, almost like a destination, often like a badge that one has to wear?
Yes. So I am a big admirer of the Stoic philosophers, and that idea that a diamond is just a piece of coal that's been placed under extraordinary pressure, or it's sort of returned to again and again. I think there are 2 different things here. So there's the Silicon Valley approach to failure, which I'm not a fan of, which is
Fail
very much
fast.
like, yeah, fail fast, break things. and it's got attached to this sort of macho vibe that I think can feel quite exclusive and quite intimidating. And I by no means advocate the active pursuit of failure. That's absolutely not it. Whereas I think some of the Silicon Valley bros might actively advocate the pursuit of failure because they're thinking, well, we need to get to the great ideas. So let's just like break all of these institutions and get to the better idea. Actually, what I'm saying is slightly different, which is that no matter how much we fear it or try to avoid it, failure is inevitable and it will happen to us all at some point to a greater or lesser degree. And once you realize that, it's quite liberating because you realize then, well, there's no point in living in fear of it. That's the first thing. The second thing is that it's the thing that connects us all. And there's something so beautiful and powerful about that. I mean, you know this from the kinds of amazing conversations you have on this podcast. Vulnerability is the source of so much shared strength. It is the antidote to all those feelings of isolation, of shame. I'm so passionate about that because there's so much revolution that can come as a result of it. So I advocate that idea of being open about our tough times so that it feels more inclusive and more democratizing for everyone else who, you're right, if they're looking at a constantly curated feed of perfection from their favorite Hollywood movie star on social media, you might be waking up and you might have a hacking cough and be living through a cost of living crisis and not know how to put food on the table. And you might feel like such a failure and so alone in your failure. And that's why it's so important for me to have these conversations that make that person, and maybe that person is you, feel less alone and like actually we all go through this. And the mere fact of surviving something like that, you're so right, is kind of great. It might be a horrible experience to go through if you've failed in a way that feels like mortifying and terrible and challenging. It's a horrible thing to go through, but I promise you that just in the act of putting one foot in front of the other, just in the act of surviving it, you have learned something about yourself. And what you've learned is that you're stronger than you thought. So really, the true success is keeping going through that and having faith that this too shall pass.
Yeah, I like that.
Beautiful, beautiful. I'd love to go into, like, you know, you've obviously been in this failure space, and I'm calling it failure space. For, you know, your book came out in 2019. You'd been probably contemplating it for a number of years before that. So it's been many years where you've been talking about this, thinking about it, interviewing people about it, like world-class renowned people about their failures, like which they're renowned for their successes. So if you were able to talk to yourself, your 35-year-old self who had just gone through this divorce, what would you say to yourself about failure? Because, you know, I'd imagine you had a certain thought on failure, and now here you are being a doctor graduate in terms of failure,
Yes.
like, and understanding it. Like, what would you say? And that would be applicable, I think, to everyone who's listening.
I think I would say that when life throws you a curveball, it's a really creative space. Sometimes the void is the most fertile place you can be because it's a space where you don't have decades and decades of your social conditioning. In my case, watching too many 1980s rom-coms, thinking I'm going to have this happy relationship and I'm going to live a life like my parents lived. That was my conditioning. When that exploded, I'm like in the void now of thinking I don't know who I am and I don't know what I'm going to do next. And that's when the best ideas happen, weirdly, because that's the fertile space. Where else can you grow into other than the unknown? So I think I'd say you might feel like a failure now, and you might feel like your life is derailing, and you might feel like you're not making the right decisions or you're not doing the quote unquote right things that you thought you'd be doing. But actually, this is where the growth is. And I promise you that if you accept the curveball, it's going to take you on the most amazing journey beyond your wildest dreams. I think the greater risk is always not going on the adventure. So I suppose I would tell myself that, not to be scared of failing, but to take the risk that you might succeed in full awareness that if you do fail, you can survive it. But for me, the greater risk is always not taking the adventure.
It's funny, there is that fear of success too. Like, we have a fear of
Yeah.
failure, and also we have a fear of actually being happy, a fear of actually reaching our dreams. And then it's like, what happens then? Because I don't know if you ever watched that show. I haven't watched it, but I like the concept behind it, The Weight of Gold, where it's a documentary about many Olympians who actually reached gold medals, and afterwards many of them had some degree of an existential crisis. What do I do now? I've worked so many years to reach this gold. I'm meant to be happily ever after, and suddenly I'm like, what do I do now? So yeah, I guess there's that.
I haven't seen that documentary, and now I really want to watch it. I love a sporting documentary. They're my favourite kind of things to watch.
Dave,
Did you? I watched I Am Bolt. That was very good about Usain Bolt. I watched that last week.
I haven't seen that one yet.
Great. And I'm watching the Michael Jordan one. I love it. Me and one of my kids were loving it. Yeah.
Obsessed with that one, The Last Dance. So
yeah,
good.
Fabulous.
And I love F1 Drive to Survive, even though I never watched Formula One, but I watched the Netflix series. Wait, what were we talking about? The Way to Gold. That's right.
The Way to Gold. Yeah.
Just the fear of success as well as the fear of failure. That it's almost like there's this fear of
the
climax.
You feel stuck.
Yeah. Or what happens after the climax? What happens after it's all happily ever after? They didn't show us all that stuff.
Yeah, interestingly, I've spoken to a few gold medalists, but I've also spoken to Matthew Said, who I'm sure you know is this amazing author and thinker, but he used to be an Olympic level table tennis player.
Wow.
And he actually competed in table tennis at the Sydney Olympics. And one of his failures was choking dramatically at the Sydney Olympics. Having had this incredibly successful table tennis career, it all just went out of the window and he performed really badly. And he had an existential crisis where he was like, well, what's the point? Like, if this is the thing that I was meant to do and I can't even do it. And he talked about something called post-traumatic growth, which is that in the darkest moments, the moment's the biggest challenge. It's actually where you also potentially grow the most. And the thing that he kept returning to was, my parents still love me. Like, that was the thing that saved him during that time. He was like, I've humiliated myself. I've lost this terrible match, but my parents still love me. But success is such an interesting one. And I think my response to that, the weight of gold issue, is to have more things in your life than just a singular focus. So we've been quite limited in how we historically have viewed success. Success has been made into a sort of capitalist quest to get a massive monetary fortune, for instance, or to become hugely famous and win an Oscar, or to win a gold medal. And the problem with that is that the focus is so singular, and because you put so much of your efforts into gaining that you neglect other parts of your life. And actually, I would encourage everyone to think of success in a more dynamic and fluid way. Maybe success is success in your relationships, like feeling that you have healthy relationships in your life where you can show up as yourself and you feel loved and appreciated, and you can give that back in return, because that will be the thing that lasts after you get your gold medal. At least you can return to having a thriving family life or having a great relationship with your pet cat. Like, that's where you get the nourishment. And for me now, success, I'm competitive with myself. I've got a lot of drive, and don't get me wrong, like it's nice to be a bestseller when I publish a book, and it's nice to see my podcast episode climbing up the chart. But I understand that that's separate from my identity, and that actually the truest success for me is being able to show up as my authentic self, as that kid who didn't feel that she fitted in. Like, I can show up as her now and be accepted for that. And not only accepted, but feel like that's a key part to what I do. So the me that is talking to you right now, the me that you will hear on How to Fail, the me that writes the books I write, the me that's married, and the me that has a best friend, we're all the same. Like, I feel like I don't have to put on a mask in the same way anymore. And that for me is true success.
You feel more transparent, more integral, more authentic. As you said, you're authentic.
Exactly.
Authentic.
Aligned. I think aligned. I'm
Yeah,
very
I like that
into
word.
the idea of alignment
No, I like that.
at the moment.
Yeah. No, I like that. I like that a lot. Well, one topic I'd love to go on to, and something I struggle with, is criticism. You know, like,
Oh my
say,
God, me too.
social media, and say things, and I'll be slightly kind of like worried or disappointed that I've upset people, or people are just angry at me, or people don't like me. And Dave, on the other hand, maybe it's through going through the divorce, you're much more comfortable with that. You're kind of like, feck 'em. You're always going to have people who don't like you. And I don't mean feck 'em, but it's like, as in, like, don't worry about it. What other people think about, is their business.
Well, yeah, it's that expression that, what other people think of you is none of your business. It's got nothing to do with you. It's their own experience and their judgment of you. But anyway, sorry, Stephen was asking you that.
Just about criticism. How do you, as part of failure, I guess one of the many bows, what would you call it? One of the many strings of failure would be criticism is part of it, is typically that. And it's something that I struggle with. How do you deal with it? And like, let's talk about criticism.
I really struggle with criticism too. And in my better days, I think it's because I'm empathetic. So I really value the fact that I have empathy and an ability to connect with people. But in order to be truly empathetic and to want to connect with others, you have to have a sense of your context in the world, a sense of what your impact is around you, but also like a thinner skin, like because you
More
have
sensitive,
to allow, you're sensitive,
you're more,
because you're allowing things in and you're being influenced by things, and that's a magical, wonderful characteristic, I think. And so the flip side of that is that I will also, sadly, be more able to let in criticism. So therefore, the first step is not beating myself up about that. So if I'm taking criticism to heart, that's a completely understandable aspect of my personality. But the second part is I've observed that. So now it's my responsibility to change how I respond to that feeling. And I think I still struggle with criticism, but I've got so much better at metabolizing it. And it is actually partly because of going through a divorce. So I was the one who ended that marriage. And I had to live with the certain knowledge, like me, a massive old people pleaser. I had to live in a certain knowledge that there were people in the world who did not like me, did not understand what I was doing. And one of them was my ex-husband and like his friends. And I had to be okay with that because I returned to the fact that I knew the truth. And whatever anyone else projected was because they were coming from a position of partial truth. And I took a great deal of sustenance from that, actually, and it got me through a tricky time. So that definitely helped. It was like immersion therapy for a sensitive people pleaser in the art of criticism and accepting it. And now, because How to Fail has grown and I have a bigger profile now than I did before, there are a number of key things that have helped me. One is the 80-20 rule, the idea that if 80% of people think you're doing an okay job, that's great. That's a great proportion. And 20% of people might have mixed feelings or they might dislike it. Now, if your profile gets bigger or if what you're doing gets bigger, the percentages will feel bigger, but actually proportionally, they're not bigger. So I still operate on that. If 80% of people more or less think I'm doing okay, that's enough. The second thing I would say is that I totally agree that very often what you might trigger in someone else is entirely to do with their emotional history, the baggage they carry, and something that they have within them. And the chances are they're not going to do the emotional labor necessary to work all of that out, but you don't need to take it on and do it for them. It's a bit like someone saying, I hate your blue hair. And I feel confident in saying, I don't have blue hair. So whatever you're seeing is not an accurate representation of how I see myself and what I believe about myself. And ultimately, it's about having the strength of your own convictions about who you are. And that's a very appealing thing. And to have that strength of conviction about who you are and showing up as yourself, of course, that means that some people will like it and some people, but the worst thing is to be so mediocre and so middle of the road that people don't have an opinion at all. They're just like, yeah, meh. I'd rather someone had a stronger opinion and that strong opinion be loathing if it means that someone else loves and gets an enormous amount from what I'm doing.
I like that you want the big emotions. I don't want any of this middle stuff. I don't want to be. Where do you want to go for lunch? I don't know. I don't mind. I don't want to be that person. Yeah, I like that.
The blue hair.
I have a point of view.
Yeah.
Your blue hair line is brilliant. That's great because it's.
Do you know
I remember
where I got that from?
No.
I got that from TikTok.
Wow.
And I can't remember who said it. I was like, that is genius. And a bit like, I love cheese. And I love vegetables, and I know you two do as well. But
it's like confession, is it?
oh no, let me just, aubergine, king of vegetables. I love an aubergine. There are some people who hate cheese or who like hate aubergine. And that's just a matter of taste. It doesn't mean that I'm wrong for liking cheese, and it doesn't mean that they hate me. It just means they have a different opinion. So that's another thing that's really helped me. The blue hair and the cheese.
Blue hair is a great one, great one. I'd love to move it back to, because like we're talking about criticism here, and I'm thinking of when you talked about your miscarriages, like that is an act of serious bravery to publicly talk about that, because that's an area that, you know, most people don't talk about it because it's a really deep personal thing. And I'd love to understand like how you were brave enough to talk about it and how it was first talking about this, because there's not a lot of people that I know that are as brave as you talking about it.
Well, thank you. That's very generous of you. I understand that a lot of lovely people think it's brave, and I've never considered it so, because it just feels natural to me, in the sense that I think I've always had this core belief in truth and speaking the truth. And maybe it's because of that childhood that I mentioned, like growing up in a province that was riven by civil war, and an understanding that sometimes the most important things were left unsaid, or like that history can be so traumatic that it's left unspoken, or that it becomes warped in some way. It just made me really passionate about naming truth when I saw it. Having said that, it took me a long time to decide to talk openly about my first miscarriage, for a number of reasons. So I was still married to my ex-husband. I think I went through what I now classify as a period of mild depression, which at the time I didn't realize. I just felt numb, but now I realize that that's what that was. And I was on staff at a Sunday newspaper here in the UK. And I had been trained as a print journalist never to bring myself into the pieces that I wrote, because I'd been trained as a news journalist. And then even when I started doing interviews, it was very old school in the sense of it's all about the person you're interviewing, which actually I agree with, but you shouldn't ever use the personal pronoun. Like, don't bring yourself into it. It's not about you. It's about you communicating a story to a reader. And then I also had a lot of social conditioning from my own family. You know, we're very English in many ways, and we're pretty repressed emotionally. There's that sense of it being shameful and slightly disgusting to share something really personal. And that's a generational thing as well. And all of that was wrapped up in my own feelings about my miscarriage. And I think I'm trying to remember when I first spoke about it. I think it was probably, it was into How to Fail territory. So it was several
And
years.
had you considered it? Sorry.
No, I don't know if you can hear that. It's my husband's FaceTime. Had I considered it,
Like, had you considered and planned that I'm going to talk about it, or did it just kind of come out like out of nowhere? It was just kind of, fuck it, I'm going to say it. Or was it something that you were kind of debating with yourself? Will I, won't I, will I, won't I?
Came out. It kind of came out. Actually, it was. So How to Fail, I'm not giving you a very lucid answer, but I promise that I'll get to the point. So How to Fail started as the podcast first in July 2018. And that first season I did, you can still hear the old print journalist if you go back and listen to it. I'm still scared about putting myself in the conversation. And actually, it was the first listeners, the OGs, who were like, we like it when we hear more of you and your interaction with the person you're interviewing. So then I challenged myself to make it into more of a kind of conversational space, which is exactly what podcasting does so beautifully. And I got an enormous amount from that. It was amazing. Like, it opened up the guest, it opened up the listening community. So that was happening. And then I wrote a book called How to Fail, and that came out in 2019. And in that book, I wrote a whole chapter about how to fail at having babies. That's what it's called. And that's where I wrote everything that I hadn't realized I'd been storing up for that moment, because it felt, I was free of a lot of stuff. I had left that dysfunctional relationship. I had enough time to think about it. So I'd had my first miscarriage at the end of 2014. So there'd been like years of percolation of thinking about it. And I knew that when I was going through IVF, specifically, and also when I was going through miscarriage, there was nothing that I could find out there that I could reach for, a book or a podcast that would tell me what was happening to me and how to get through these feelings. So I wanted to write that chapter for the me as I was then. And that chapter had a massive impact on my life because it was the chapter that most people got in touch with me about. And I suddenly realized there was this whole historically silent community of people who had been struggling with the same things and who felt so relieved that someone had said it, and who, for whatever reason, didn't feel able to say it themselves. And they were really relieved that someone else was speaking for them. And I just got a great sense of purpose from that. And so I kept on doing it. And since then, I've learned a few things. I think I've learned that for me to be of use in what I share, I always need to let enough time pass first, because quite often my initial instinct is something's happened to me and I want to share it, because how I make meaning of it and how I process my own feelings is to write about it or talk about it. And I've understood now that it's always better for me to leave a bit of time so that I can, so that I can speak from a position where I've got through it and I've been able to process emotions a bit and I'm able to offer something helpful. But it's really lovely of you to consider it brave, but I think it's part of my purpose on earth. And it comes really naturally to me. And I'm really passionate about continuing to do it.
I think fair play.
And-
So brave you. So brave you.
Yeah,
Thank
really.
you. I
And one
think-
thing, even on Monday we spoke with Peter A. Levine, who was one of the founders of Somatic Experience. Like I think he spent
Trauma.
50 years working in trauma and, written so many books on it and total world expert on it. And he was talking about how trauma can only exist in isolation. So by you talking
Yes.
about it, you're allowing this trauma to kind of let this captured energy out.
Exactly. And actually, there's an amazing Johann Hari quote about the opposite of alienation being connection. No, the opposite of addiction is connection.
Yeah.
And that feeds into the same idea. Like the opposite of trauma is connection. Like that sense that you can share and release. You're so right. It's been incredibly cathartic for me. And I'm a huge believer in therapy, and I have fortnightly therapy, and I find that very, very helpful. And it means that it can help me process like how other people respond to what I'm processing. So I love that. I love that quote. That I'm going to listen to that episode when it comes out.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
cool, yeah.
I certainly noticed that when I went through my divorce, it took a number of years before I felt comfortable talking about it without that energy in it. Without that kind of, like you can talk about it now and I can feel there's no energy, there's no sense of that shame or whatever,
Your voice
poor
kinda
me
going
or
funny
victim
or-
or anything within it. Whereas when
Yeah.
I think someone's processed someone, they can talk about it like the same way they're talking about, like, other things that are more normal. Whereas when someone hasn't processed about it, it comes out with this meek voice, and there is that. And I remembered myself when in the early days talking about it, I didn't want to talk about it publicly. I felt there was shame. I hadn't processed it properly.
Totally.
But when I had given enough time that I processed about it, well, then it was like talking about the weather, or talking about the trees, or talking about what are we going for lunch, because it was just, there wasn't that trauma within it.
And also, Dave, sometimes we feel like our most personal feelings are just ours because we're big old neurotic weirdos. Like because we exist inside ourselves. So we understand how messy and imperfect we are. And we're constantly comparing ourselves to everyone else's externals. So we think that they've all got it more sorted. But actually, my discovery was that something I thought was so personal turned out to be more universal than I ever could have imagined. And I think that's something really powerful for anyone to remember, that the personal is universal. and yeah, that's why we should all get together in a big old group therapy session and just share.
That
Because
sounds
I
fun.
really
There's
did
like
make
a
me learn
slogan
so
in that.
much.
I
There's a
love
slogan
that.
in that too. The
What's
personal
personal?
is the universal. It makes you think. It's
Yeah.
one of those things that you see and you go, "What the hell does that mean?" But then when you
Only
do
with the
think-
context.
Yeah. I think. But I
Yeah.
think there's a
And
lot.
actually, just on that note, my latest book is called Friendaholic, and it's
I
all,
want
it's
to
a
talk
sort
to you
of-
about that.
Okay, so but just briefly, there's a chapter in that book about being ghosted by someone I would have considered one of my 3 closest friends, like
Wow.
brutally ghosted
Wow.
overnight. It felt like to me, and I had so much shame around that, so much shame. And then
Wow.
I was like, no, but if I'm telling the truth about friendship, I need to write about this, because when you're ghosted by a friend, you think, I must have done something so horrendously awful to elicit this dramatic response. And so I had to take a very clear-eyed look at myself and my own failings as a friend in that particular situation. And the process of writing about it was uncomfortable, but also kind of amazing, because there was that sense of getting it down on paper and processing those emotions and releasing that energy. And again, something that I felt such a personal sense of shame over, that chapter has had the most resonance in that book. And so many other people have come forward and said, it happened to me too. And I've never read it put into words like this. And so I now know that that's sort of where the good stuff is. It's like where I'm initially, it may be a bit reluctant to go, I should challenge myself to go there.
Oh,
Yeah,
it's like those hard
so-
chats that you don't want to have and you're afraid to have, and you go in there going, I don't want to do this, I do anything not to do this, and then you go in and you do it and you go, I remember, and this was even, and this is not one of those chats, but I remember there was a pretty girl, this is back when I was single, there was a pretty girl kept coming into the cafe, and I was working in the cafe, and she came in every day for a week, and I was like, Stephen, I dare you, ask her out to her face, just go, here, listen, I think you're really pretty, I'd love to get to know you, can we go for a walk? And I dared myself to do it, and I did it. And she happened to say, yeah. But if she said no, I wouldn't have cared less, because I did it. It was like, yes, I did it. You know, it's this release, this kind of feeling of, I guess, acknowledging your desire and actually being true to who you are. And the outcome didn't matter.
Is she now your wife?
No, but that was just it.
I know that wasn't the point of the anecdote. That's so sweet. Yeah, you're right. Exactly. Because very often we think what we're looking for is a relationship with someone else, but it's being more in love with the relationship with yourself, if that makes sense. So the fact that you would then know that you had been brave enough to take that chance
and to do what you believe to be true.
Something about yourself. Yeah, that's a really lovely thing that you now know about yourself, that you have that capacity.
Yeah, absolutely. And are you friends with that person anymore? Did it ever rekindle?
No.
Wow.
No, I anonymized it extensively for the purposes of the book, obviously. But the emotional truth is all exactly as it was. And no, talking about having been a people pleaser earlier, that got me into really sort of thorny territory with certain friendships where, again, I was just like overextending myself in this sort of one-way relationship that should be the essence of reciprocity. And actually, over the last few years, I've really understood that a friendship that makes you feel drained or less than or guilty, or that you're just not good enough in some way, is not a true friendship.
No.
And we shouldn't feel shame about lovingly bringing those to an end or putting them into a different place in our lives.
Wow.
So no, we're not friends.
Can you tell us more about this new book? It's coming out in March. It's called Friendaholic, which is a very interesting title.
Is that a bit like someone who is, friends are an addiction, a distraction? They're kind of just collecting friends, and they need to be busy with their friends as opposed to actually sitting in the void. Sitting in there.
Yes, exactly. They nailed it. Yes. So it's called Friendaholic, Confessions of a Friendship Addict, which is something that I identify as. And it's a splashy title in one sense, but it also has a very serious undertone in that I do genuinely believe that one can be addicted to friendship in the same way that you can be addicted to love in an unhealthy way, or sex, or codependency. I definitely got an adrenalized hit every time I felt that I made someone like me, or that someone wanted to be my friend. And that had its roots in this lonely childhood and feeling like I didn't fit in. And it made me almost manic in my pursuit of friendship, because I felt that without friendship, I would be unsafe and alone. And I was scared of the void, and I was scared of that loneliness. And particularly then later on, as a woman who was trying and failing to have children, I was like, well, I won't even have my own children. So I just need to have this like massive, ever expanding group of friends, so that I will always be able to shore up that sense of self that I really lack. And that was something that I experienced throughout my 20s. And I feel ashamed about it now. Like I do. I feel I didn't show up in the ways that I would have shown up in key friendships, because I didn't know who I was. And so that's what a friendaholic is. It's someone whose dependency on the idea of friendship means that they actually have misunderstood the true nature of friendship as it should be. And Friendaholic was me writing my journey of understanding that. So sort of like coming to terms with what I had done in the past, but also how to pursue friendship in the future in a more genuine, authentic way. And along that journey, I talked to 5 of my friends, each of whom represents something slightly different about friendship. And I interview them about what they think. And I also go into a whole like geeky spiral, and I look into the academic research and I read Cicero. And it was like a fascinating book to research, and it taught me so much. And so that's the book in a nutshell.
Wow. What are some of the big learnings in terms of friendship? If you were like, obviously people need to buy the book, but even a hook, give us a couple of
That
hooks.
is the main learning.
Give us a
Yeah,
couple
you're
of
right.
hooks.
Well, one of the things that I learned that really blew my mind. So there is an OG of friendship studies called Professor Robin Dunbar, who I am obsessed with, and I love his work. And I'd never actually met him until after the book was published in hardback. And then I met him, and he was absolutely lovely. And it's just
Oh,
always so
nice.
nice. So anyway, he is a professor of evolutionary psychology at Oxford University, and he spent a lot of his professional life devoted to studying friendship. And he's very well known for coining Dunbar's number. He's one of only 10 scientists ever to have a number named after them, and 9 of them are dead. So he's flying the flag. And Dunbar's number is 150, and it is the number of connections that he believes a human brain can cope with. And what he means by that is a connection where you know their name and you know a salient fact about their life, and you would invite them to a big party, you'd invite them to a big wedding. And his point is that the human brain is not sufficiently developed to have more connections than 150, where those things are true. And it's a number that is replicated again and again throughout history. It is the average size of a medieval village, for instance. It's the average size of a Christmas card list. And it's so interesting because beyond that, it does all get a bit unwieldy. And that was a very interesting thing that he developed. But several years later, he finessed that idea of Dunbar's number into the idea of Dunbar's layers, which is the idea that we have friendship layers. So we all have, hopefully, multiple relationships in our life that perform multiple different functions. In the innermost friendship layer, Dunbar says you have space for up to 5 key relationships, because close friendships require time and nurturing. And the fact is that time is finite, and we don't have an ever expanding basis of it. So you only have room for 5. If you get married, or you settle down in a long-term relationship, or you have kids, he says that will generally cost you 2 of those other relationships, because you're having to re-allot your time. Your time is a very precious resource. Now, that doesn't mean that you then can't have amazing friends in the second layer, the third layer, and it goes up in increments of 5. So in your second layer, it might go up to 10, then 15, then 20. It just means that they will perform different functions, and you probably need to have those conversations with yourself about how you're going to pursue those friendships. What I had been doing wrong was that I thought in order to be a quote unquote good friend, I had to treat everyone as if they were in that innermost circle. And I obviously couldn't do it. I was exhausting myself by trying. And it meant that because I was rushing around trying to be this mythical good friend to every single person, I was running myself ragged, and I was losing a lot of energy, and I was exhausted. And that meant that I was resentful, and therefore I wasn't being a good friend anyway. And so that was a real light bulb moment for me, where I thought, oh, I've been doing it wrong. And actually, in order to be a better friend to my innermost layer, I actively need to reassess how I distribute the resource of time. And so that's transformed my ideas of friendship. And then the other thing, if I'm allowed another one.
Oh, please. Yes. Fabulous. I'm
Okay.
loving this.
Okay. The other thing is about ambivalent friendships. So frenemies, those friends that sometimes we have in our life who sometimes can be incredibly nice and generous and show up with a potted orchid just out of the blue, but sometimes can be so mean and jabbing and passive aggressive and undermining. And very often that's to do with their own stuff, and they're having a hard time. And obviously every friendship will have periods of stretch where one person's going through a difficult time and the other person will stretch to accommodate that. But an ambivalent friend is someone who keeps doing that, who just keeps throwing you stuff and you're not quite sure what ball you're going to catch. Those friends are actively bad for your physical health. So there's this fascinating study that's been done by the University of Utah where they strap people up to blood pressure monitors and they monitored them as they went about their daily business. If those people had interactions with people they loved, great for their blood pressure, very soothing. If they had interactions with people they actively hated, also fine for their blood pressure, it didn't actually affect it.
Wow.
If they had an interaction with an ambivalent friend where they never knew what they were going to get, it caused a blood pressure spike because of that constant sense of anxiety and calibration. You're constantly having to change and shift yourself in response to what you're getting from that ambivalent person. And these blood pressure spikes can negatively affect the, I don't know if I'm going to pronounce this right, they're called telomeres at the end of DNA strands. So they actually negatively affect your DNA. And again, that was a revelatory thing for me to discover, because I think often if you're in an ambivalent friendship, you feel like you're the one doing something wrong, but actually you're just preserving your own health if you dial down the volume on that friendship for a bit.
Yeah,
Good ones. I like those two. They're
I
great.
love the five. Bet most people listening are going, okay, my five. Who are my five? What do I have?
Or kind of going, who should I relegate? Like thinking of, I've got to relegate a few people. I don't have enough space in that inner one or whatever it is. You're Division 3 now.
That's what I think.
The key is you don't have to tell them. You don't have to tell them they'd be relegated. But also they'll be doing that too, probably subconsciously. You're not going to be in everyone else's inner circle, and that's completely fine.
Yeah, you don't want to be. As you said, time is finite. You've got to prioritize what really
and
fills
ultimately,
you up.
you need to have yourself in there as numero uno, as in to be a friend for yourself.
Ooh,
Definitely,
good one, Stevie.
definitely. That is good. And that's exactly what I want people to get from Friendaholic, is to be able to show up as a best friend for themselves first, because you're totally right. You can't pour from an empty cup. I think, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go. Sorry, you were thinking something wonderful.
I think the other thing that I've realized is that we all have different metrics of what friendship is. So for some people, their most important metric of friendship is being able to play golf together, or it'll be going on a monthly mini break with your friend, or it'll be, I want a daily phone call. Now, for me, it's none of that. It's generosity of spirit. So it's the idea that my friend will be thinking the best of me, whatever the circumstances. And even if I am terrible at getting back to their email or their text message, and even if we only see each other once every 3 months, I know that we will show up and be thinking the best of each other and be so happy to see each other when we do, that we can hit that relational depth very quickly. And that's also been a kind of mind expanding idea for me. And if your friend doesn't want the best for you, that's not generosity of spirit for me.
I like that. Good one. Here. And I was going to say, I see, like, you talked about earlier on, you talked about a book launch where there was 4 people there and 4 people on the, on the stand or whatever.
Yeah.
And I looked now, and you've got an international book tour coming up in March, which is very exciting. I saw events in Australia and one in Dublin, which is very exciting.
I know.
And
in
Derry.
Fact, when does this podcast come out? Because I should say when the one in Dublin is.
The one in Dublin is
remember.
March the 20-something in the...
Yeah.
I was
Good
looking at
job,
it just
David
there. It was in in Dublin somewhere, in a UCD building. I'll tell you where it was now, because I was literally reading it recently.
David Flynn, you're very good. This will probably come out, I'd say, in the next few weeks. Sean, any idea?
Oh, great. Then I can give it a little... Okay, yeah.
What is it?
Wait.
Sean's telling us now. Sean's just having a
13th of March. 13th of March in
nice.
Dublin at the National Concert Hall.
Ooh, the National Concert Hall. Aren't you very sophisticated? My friend used to go there.
I
And
try.
He'd go looking for kind of no, I won't say that.
Okay. So yes, so I'm doing Derry on the 12th of March. Barely sold any tickets. Isn't that classic? I insisted on going to Derry because I was like, that's where I grew up. I
There
want
you
to go.
go. They all love me. I want to just...
They do not love me. They never did. Anyway, hopefully we're about to announce an amazing interviewer. So hopefully that will shift some tickets. Derry on the 12th of March. And on the 13th of March, Dublin. I cannot tell you how much I love Dublin. It's always such a fantastic atmosphere whenever I do anything in Dublin at the National Concert Hall. I can't wait. I think it's
If you have
almost sold
time,
out.
come down and
Are
visit
you
us
going to
for a sec.
interview people? Are you going to
I'd
interview
love
people at the
to.
thing?
No, I'm being interviewed. Well, it's like conversations with friends. So there'll be an interviewer, but we'll throw it both ways, and then it opens up to the audience, and it does genuinely become like a beautiful group therapy session. It's always my favorite bit, the Q&A.
That's
Q&A is always
great
nice.
fun.
It
Yeah,
says here in the calendar the 12th to 13th of March, but maybe I'll ask Sarah to put it up sooner, so then it promotes it. I'll ask Sarah. Sarah produced the
thank
podcast, so
you.
yeah,
Okay.
we'll get up soon. We'll try to get up in
no
Feb.
pressure.
Yeah, no, well, no, we'll
and Australia. I saw there's Australia as well. Then you go on touring Australia.
I know. Isn't that mad?
That's class. That's so much fun.
It's so much fun. And I have to say, I'm so grateful to Australian and New Zealand audiences, because they've been supporters of How to Fail the podcast since it started. They're like one of my biggest audiences. And this opportunity came up, and I just thought, I mean,
Hell
that
yeah.
sounds amazing. I mean, hell yeah. And will I sell any tickets? And actually,
Doesn't
it's
matter.
been
Go to
incredible.
Australia.
It doesn't matter, because I'm going to Australia anyway. And I cannot wait. So yeah, I'm doing the Sydney Opera House.
Oh my God. Listen, I got to give you a
Just-
round of applause for that one.
That
That's
is
congratulations.
Minor flex.
Yeah,
I'm actually doing the Sydney Opera House on the same night as Taylor Swift is playing Sydney. And I think there's a lot of crossover in the audience, so I'm not sure how that will go. And then I'm doing a date in Melbourne, and I've never been to Melbourne, so I'm really looking forward to some sunshine, and my partner's coming, and we're tacking on a holiday at the end. It'll be really fun.
Amazing.
Congratulations.
What crack.
How wonderful.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it's a fun couple of months coming up.
Yeah,
Great
yeah,
fun. Well, I'm sure that only comes after you've done plenty of hard work.
Yeah, that's kind of you to say. I am a bit of a workaholic, but it's because I love it so much, and then I do think it reaps rewards to put effort in. So yeah, I'll report back. I'll see you in Dublin.
Okay. Brilliant. Okay. Thanks a million, Elizabeth.
Thank you
Cheers.
so
Thanks a
much.
million.
Mind yourself.
Bye.
See you.
Bye.
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 While we have you, once a week we write a newsletter. It's called Happier. It's got simple, tried and tested practices to make your life better. We include recipes and practices that you can apply on a daily basis to make your life happier. We've had lots of people say before that it's really helped make their life better. So you can sign up on the happypear.ie, our weekly newsletter called Happier.